Hola, damas y caballeros, and welcome to another edition of the Bleed Los Podcast. This week's episode is presented by our partners at BetOnline. Basketball is back, and BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup, info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And as your continued source for all of your sports wagering info, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. It's always the fastest and easiest way to bet on your favorite sports, events, whether that's the NFL, the NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. So if you head on over to betonline.ag to join, you will receive a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. So make sure that you use our promo code, which is BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive those rewards. BetOnline, where the game starts. I'm still kind of... I don't know if the word is flabbergasted, but I'm still very surprised that the Dodgers announced what they announced this week, Juanito, and that is that they're announcing the 34, and I think they did it in a fitting way at FanFest because obviously, you know, the fans had been calling for that for a while, but you guys were there. I wasn't there, so I just wanted to ask the two of you, what was your reaction when you heard that news?
Let me tell you, I was just as shocked as you were. So Babyface and I were in the visitors' bullpen. That's where all the media was, and that's where all the interviews were being conducted with the players. And Dodgers PR, all of a sudden, there was a little lull in between interviews, and Dodgers PR had instructed us. So the main stage where the Fan Fest, where the interviews, where everything was going on, was out in right field. It was on the actual field. So Dodgers PR had told us, hey, you guys might want to go out over by the stage. There's going to be an announcement made. You're going to want to know it. So, you know, everyone in the media, you know, friends of the carne asada were all there. Dylan Hernandez, Jorge Castillo, Juan Toribio, they were all there, and we all mosey on out into the outfield. And then we see Valenzuela come through the bullpen, and Stan Kasten is on the stage, and they call up Valenzuela, and then Babyface and I start looking at each other. And I think Babyface, I think you were the first one at that point, you thought, oh, it's going to be a statue. They're going to announce that it's going to be a statue. I think the majority of us had this feeling that they're going to do a statue before they retire the number. I mean, Fred Rogan, who was on the show, had said they're not going to retire his number. They'll give him a statue. And then so Kasten's talking, and while he's talking, then I think you started to get or there was maybe a little bit of doubt in my mind going, wait a minute, maybe they're going to retire his number. Are this actually happening? And then Kasten announces it and says the Dodgers are retiring Valenzuela's jersey. And this is where I was trying to be professional because I was there as a member of the media. I didn't want to cheer out loud, but I was so happy that it actually happened because as much as we talk about this, I just thought the Dodgers are never going to do this. I mean, what am I correct, Babyface? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like when we went out, my first thought, I'm like, will they retire his number? I'm like, nah, they won't retire his number, right? Like when he starts talking, I'm like thinking, a statue. Yeah, they're gonna do a statue, right? It's gonna be because he was talking about like how they're making improvements to the stadium, they're adding stuff, they're gonna redo the lights. You know, so you guys know as well, they're gonna redo the lights. They're gonna make them all LED, so they could actually turn off the lights on and off like in a second. So that's gonna be kind of cool, right? So he's talking about all that stuff, and I'm all, okay, yeah, they're gonna do a statue, and then he starts talking about the numbers. So I'm like, crap, they're going to do it. They're actually going to do it. They're actually going to retire his number. And then, you know, he goes on saying, you know, what he told us on the show, you know, they were respectful to the traditions and they wanted to just stay with all that. He's all, but we're going to make an exception and we're going to retire Fernando's number. So yeah, I mean, I was like, wow, like they're actually doing it. Like it was kind of like surreal. Like you didn't know like how to like, I mean, you were happy, but it's like, wow, they're actually doing it. Like it's finally going to happen, you know?
No. And I mean, I think, the thing about it all is we talked about the tradition, right? And we, you know, and you could kind of hear, and we'll get into the interviews in a moment, you know, just because this might surprise some of you, but I've been privy to listen to the interviews already. But the reaction of kind of everyone being like, that was the right guy, right? And I feel like that was the correct, candidate, I guess, for lack of a better term, if you're going to make an exception to the rule. And you could see from kind of year to year, Fernando's very reserved, right? He's got a really good poker face, but for him to react the way that he did, just kind of tells you everything you need to know, right, Juan?
No, absolutely. But I wonder if you have a theory on this, Alonso, because Babyface and I were asking ourselves this after they had made the announcement.
Right.
Like, why now? Like, what changed? Because Caston said it while he was on stage that this is probably, if not the main question, but one of the main questions that he consistently gets asked. And that is, when are you guys going to retire Valenzuela's number? And, he had mentioned that they wanted to respect the tradition. I think there was that fear that it was going to open a can of worms. And I saw it already on social media. I don't know if you guys saw it, but after the announcement was made, everyone then, I guess, starts bringing up Garvey, starts bringing up Ron Say. And it's you mentioned it just a few minutes ago, Alonso. This guy is different. There is a reason why they made an exception to the rule for this dude. And as much as Garvey is, as important as Garvey is to the Dodgers, Valenzuela is different. I mean, do you have a theory as to why they decided to do it now?
Probably because they were tired of getting asked the question. I think at the end of the day, this ownership group is respective of history of this organization, right? Like you'll hear an interview in a minute where one of the interviewees points out that there's been very little numbers retired since 1958. And that's for the rule, right? Respecting the rule and respecting the tradition. And I think, traditions are obviously meant to be, kind of interpreted, by within the eye of the beholder. And I think in this particular instance, you can't look at the Dodgers and not look at the impact that certain guys had, right? And you listed a few guys there, but the one guy that you really can't move Dodger lore around is Fernando Valenzuela. And so I think that was important to recognize him. And, again, whether we agreed with the rule or not, that was the rule, right? You may not like the house rules, but we got to follow them. And so at the end of the day, I think they realized, like, hey, we need to give this dude his flowers while he's still here, because we could sit here and litigate, oh, well, they should have done this while Vin was here. We could have done this, this time. That's neither here or there at this point because it is what it is. But at this point, I think the Dodgers did the right thing. And I'm not even giving them a cop-out. I mean, it really is what it is. I mean, you just got to look at it for what it is. And I think they did the respective thing, and they gave the appropriate guy the flowers he deserves, while he's still here and while Jaime Jarrin is still here. And, and who I'm excited for as well, because I know he has a really good relationship with him, is Julio Urias, because he gets to experience that with him in come August and that weekend. So I think it's instead of focusing on the negative, obviously we just got to celebrate, because at the end of the day, that's what Latinos are good at. We celebrate everything. I'm going to bring a 30 rack to El Bautismo.
Babyface, do you have a theory as to why they changed their mind?
I mean, I think obviously, like, it's something that we've always said, like, why can't they just change the rule, right? Like, I mean, they're in charge, right? Like, whoever, he can just change the rule. They can just change the rule and say, okay, we'll retire his number, right? That's what we always thought. And kind of, that's kind of what it seems like it all boiled down to, right? It's like somebody said, you know what, screw it, we'll retire it, right? And they did it. I mean, I think as time goes on, maybe the noise got louder, right? Because you go back 10 years ago, people probably wanted it, right? But, there wasn't as much social media. There wasn't as many platforms like ours on podcasts, right? People discussing it. And I think from 10 years to 5 years to now, I think the noise gets louder and louder, and it keeps getting louder. And it would have continued getting louder going forward. And I think maybe that had something to do with it as well, right? It's just they knew it's going to continue to get louder and louder. And they said, you know what, it's time to do it. And they're doing it.
I want to follow up on something that Alonso had said, in the sense that I think and now in today's day and age, it is easy to just bitch and moan on and focus on the negative, and we kind of lose sight of the fact that, hey, dude, the important thing is that they retired his number. The important thing is that they finally got it right. Yes, it took as long as it did, but they got it right. And I started hearing people complaining, like the minute the announcement was made, there were complaints. I agree with you, Alonso. I think FanFest was the perfect venue to announce it, but there were people that had problems with how they announced it, that it seemed a little bit half-assed. So to answer your question, Alonso, I don't think anyone's ever going to be happy. I mean, we finally got what we wanted, and we wanted the jersey retired, and people are still finding a way to complain. This is, in the words of the great Rick James via Dave Chappelle, it's a celebration. You know, it finally happened, because I honestly, I think there was a part of me that was trying to convince myself that one day we would see the number 34 up there retired.
Right.
But now that it actually happened, and I bet you the day of the ceremony, and by the way, they're doing this over a weekend. It's 3 days. I can't remember them doing 3 days to honor somebody like this. I mean, it'll be really interesting when they finally retire Kershaw, if they're going to make Kershaw, if this is going to be a new tradition where they're going to take like a whole series to celebrate whoever's going up in the Ring of Honor. But I get it, guys. There's a lot to complain about in terms of why this took long. But I think the important thing is to focus is they got it right. It's finally done. And Valenzuela is up there.
Yep. And I mean, and again, you're not going to make everyone happy. That's the thing, right? No matter what you do, how you do it, where it is, when it is, there's always someone, right? So I think, but for Fernando, I'm so excited because I know he's not the type that's going to go out on a limb and say, hey, you need to retire my number. That's not his style. But he also understands what that accolade means, right? You know, he's a subscriber of history. So I think all in all, though, for Fernando, for his family, for Latinos, I think it's a win all around, no matter how you look at it. But most importantly, for Fernando, that dude deserves all the flowers, and I'm glad that they're giving them to him while he's here. So speaking of it, I alluded to it. You guys talked to some people, and I feel like they all had a different perspective, but it kind of came to the same conclusion when the same question was asked. Who are we starting with, Babyface?
Who do you want to start with, Juan?
Well, I think we should start with the man of the hour. I think we should start with Valenzuela because there was very few. I mean, he talked to the media as a group, but there were very few outlets that actually got one-on-one time with him. It was CBS, it was Univision, and it was the Bleed Los podcast. Okay, so for those of you listening, for those of you watching, we are legitimate media now here, okay? We were given alone time with the man of the hour. So I think we should start with Fernando because I think you're going to see Alonso's point. The man is reserved. He is not. This is probably the opposite of what he is. I don't think he likes this kind of attention. But sometimes when you're that important, you have to find a way to deal with it. So let's roll, Fernando.
Loosely used legitimate media, please.
Felicidades, Fernando. Nosotros somos el Bleed Los Podcast, somos latinos. Alicia del Valle es uno de mis colegas. Desde que empezamos a hacer el programa, nosotros le preguntábamos a todos los Dyers cuándo van a retirar tu número. Porque para nosotros tú representas a los mexicanos, es la razón por cual los mexicanos aman a los Dodgers. La paciencia que tú tenías para esperar este momento, ¿cómo te sentiste cuando te avisaron?
No, me sorprendí un poco porque realmente, como lo acabas de mencionar, pues había pasado un tiempo ya un poquito largo, ¿no? Entonces, pero nunca se perdió la esperanza, ¿no? De que llegara este momento. Sé que Alicia y otras personas, bueno, han siempre colaborado para que este número pues se retirara, ¿no? Así es de que, bueno, yo creo que sí fue una gran sorpresa, así es de que pues aquí estamos ya con el número retirado, así de que adelante.
Felicidades, te voy a dejar que goces con tu familia. Nomás te quiero dejar saber que entrevistamos a Dale Murphy y le preguntamos, ¿tú crees no han retirado el número 34? Y Dale Murphy nos dijo, yo no lo creo. Ese número, ¿desde cuándo debería de haber estado retirado? Todos en las ligas mayores quieren ese número retirado. Felicidades, Fernando.
No, muchas gracias. Y bueno, gracias por esta oportunidad de saludar a toda la gente. Así es de que por ahí vamos a estar. Gracias.
Gracias.
For those of you that may or may not speak Spanish, Juan asked him, kind of what how he felt about everything and the retirement of the number, and he said, I always held out hope that they would retire it, and I'm glad it's being retired. And I got to thank the fans, got to thank the community, got to thank the city of Los Angeles for kind of being behind me and always supporting me. And then Juan asked him if he knew that Dale Murphy had said what he said on our program about the jersey not being retired. He completely ignored the homie Dale Murphy and said, our apologies to Dale Murphy. He got the bump. But he thanked everyone again and thanked the community and that he'll catch you down the road. So, but again, I mean, that's Fernando in a nutshell, right? If you spend any time with him, he's very reserved. He's very, he doesn't like the spotlight, but again, he said it himself, he had the hopes that the number would be retired. It's being retired, but he understands baseball lore, and now, he'll be enshrined in that, at least in the Dodgers ring of honor. But I wanted to ask you one for you, as a small child. Well, actually, you weren't a child; you were a teenager when Fernando Mania was happening. How kind of full circle was that for you to talk to?
That was insane for me, because first of all, I didn't think we would get. I mean, the area in the bullpen where they were interviewing the players was really small, and the amount of media that was there, it made it really hard to be able to get that level of intimacy. For me, I still, to tell you the truth, it feels like it happened so fast. There were two takeaways that I took from that. One is, even he acknowledged that what we were discussing, like he said, it's like, I asked him, I mean, how can you be that patient, right? Because he's been done playing for a while. And for that number, I mean, I think probably the perfect time to do it was when it was the 40th anniversary of Fernando Mania. Yeah. That season would have been probably the season to do it. So he acknowledged that, after a while, it took a long time. So I'm sure he had his doubts. Yeah. He is a humble man who probably, doesn't want to have these conversations. He doesn't want to have to, I mean, when you think about it, it's almost like you're having to beg them to be like, hey, can you acknowledge my accomplishments? And I don't think anyone is comfortable with that, even at your work. I mean, yeah. I don't think you want to have to go to your boss and be like, hey, man, I do this, I do this, I do that. I deserve this, right? Yeah. You hope that someone on their own will acknowledge your accomplishments and recognize them. The other thing that I took a lot of joy in is he mentioned there, I mean, he referenced the Princesa de Picolandia. He was aware of the efforts to try to get his number retired. Yeah. So the fact that he acknowledges that so many people wanted this for him, I think is probably the closest we're going to get to Valenzuela acknowledging his stature in the community. Because like you said, Alonso, he is a humble man. I don't think you'll ever hear it from him that he's the reason why the Dodgers have the Latino fan base that he has. But the fact that he acknowledges that so many people wanted this for him, I think just speaks to the fact that he is aware of how beloved he is in this city. Right, Babyface?
Yeah, and like I said, we've discussed, like, when we discussed, like, oh, Fernando should be, he should have his number retired, right? And people would always tell us, he's not in the Hall of Fame, right? And he's not a Hall of Famer, right? His numbers aren't going to be in the Hall of Fame, right? Probably not, right? But we'd always say, like, it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond the game. What Fernando did for what he did for the community, what he did for LA, what he did for baseball, right? I mean, let alone in LA, right? He brought back the Latino community, the Mexican community, right? But he did this also across the league. Like when we talked to Dale Murphy, like, you know, when Fernando Mania was in its full blown peak, he was packing out stadiums across the country, right? And these are other places where maybe the Latino community wasn't as strong as LA, right? I mean, in Atlanta and other places, right? In Montreal or wherever, right? These places were getting packed out to go see this little Mexican kid, right, from Sonora, Mexico, right? Like that's pretty insane, right? When you think about that, like, I mean, who else has done that? Like, I mean, right now maybe Otani, right, because he's a unicorn, right? Like maybe he's the only one comparable to that. But I mean, the Mania, I don't even think for Otani has been what we saw with Fernando Mania.
No, and again, you know, I cannot emphasize how happy I am for Fernando. Even though he seemed very stoic, you could tell that he was excited, but he was also uncomfortable. I get it. Like you're kind of, you know, being thrown the gambit, if you will. But I mean, I'm just glad he's receiving his flowers. Moving on, we heard from another one of Juan's. I'm going to say Fight Club, but Fight Club in a good way, like a guy that he would fight for. El Maestro Jaime Jarrin. Go ahead and roll that, Roger.
Let me pull that one. All right, there it is. Wait, that's not him.
Legitimate media. Remember that when we're
Estamos con el maestro Jaime Jarrin. Maestro, desde que empezamos nuestro programa, a todos los Dodgers les preguntábamos cuándo van a retirar el número de Valenzuela. Ya da vergüenza. Y la última vez que usted vino al programa, usted nos dijo que usted habló con los Dodgers y le dijeron a usted que no, y tenían reglas. Pero al fin hoy lo hicieron. ¿Cómo se siente? Porque yo pienso que usted es responsable parte de esto.
Bueno, me siento feliz, en verdad. Me siento feliz por Fernando. Porque pues he tenido el privilegio de estar con Fernando desde el día en que llegó a los Dodgers. Me acuerdo, en un septiembre de 1980, estábamos en Houston. Y desde entonces, pues Fernando ha enseñado un talento extraordinario. Y como dicen en inglés, this was overdue. Debía haber pasado ya hace mucho tiempo, pero por X razón los Dodgers no lo hacían. No sé, esperaban una oportunidad especial, pero lo interesante es que finalmente el número de Fernando va a ser retirado. Su número va a permanecer allí donde estamos, muy pocos en verdad, y eso es maravilloso porque el número de 34 va a permanecer en Dodger Stadium por los siglos, Así es que además me satisface muchísimo por el hecho de que yo he pasado por estas cosas y sé lo que se siente. Fernando lo va a sentir, aunque él, su personalidad no le permite expandirse, abrirse, así es él, pero lo goza interiormente, pero sobre todo su familia va a gozar. Linda y los muchachos van a apreciar esta gran distinción, es retirar el número. Retirar el número es algo muy, muy particular. Toman en cuenta que los Dodgers han estado aquí desde 1958 y desde entonces muy poquitos números se han retirado, y ahora finalmente el de Fernando.
For those of you listening that once again are not bilingual, Juan asked him, again, same question as far as that goes, and I mean, you heard it from the man himself. He himself said it in Spanish that it was overdue, and that the distinction was not only important for again the community, the city, the organization, but for Fernando and his wife Linda and kids, and again pointed out the particularness of how many numbers the Dodgers have retired since 1958, and I think that was kind of one thing I thought about as I went through and listened to all these interviews, that there really hasn't been a lot of numbers retired since 1958, and he himself said, the distinction of that, because again, we're talking about a number being retired out of a blue blood organization, right? In pro sports in this country, which that's a big deal, and again, I mean, there's another guy we're going to hear from in a minute that also could be worthy of that distinction with the rules being bent, and again he points out the perfectness of that it's Fernando being retired. But I wanted to ask you hearing that from Jaime Jarrin, again a guy that subscribes to the history and the lore of baseball, what did that mean to you, Juan?
First of all, the fact that I was able to talk to him one-on-one, I mean, we've had him on the show, but to have him talk to us and treat us like colleagues and give us as much time as he did, it was a moment that I'll cherish. But look, when he came on the show, he told us, like, this was a crusade for him.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nobody else that told us that they went into the Dodgers office and said, hey, when are you guys going to do this? And the fact that they said no to him, a Hall of Famer, this is the reason why I thought they're never going to do it. If Jarrin, who is so important to the Latino community, and we've seen this, if you compare it to what's going on with the Angels and Artie Moreno, and how they approach the Latino community compared to how the Dodgers approach the Latino community, for them to not acknowledge it, it has to feel so great for Jarrin, because Jarrin was a part of Fernando Mania. Jarrin was the guy traveling with Fernando. He was translating for Fernando. Probably no one knows better than Jarrin how difficult it is for Valenzuela to not only deal with the media, but to receive this kind of attention. I thought what was really great was that he realized, look, I've been through this before. I know what this feels. And the fact that he acknowledged that his kids, that Fernando Valenzuela's kids and his family, they're the ones that are probably going to end up appreciating it the most. Because in the end, this is about legacy. And finally, their father's legacy is being honored. And whenever you walk into Dodger Stadium from this point on, you will see the Valenzuela name. People will talk about Valenzuela. And as a member of that family, I have to assume that must feel amazing.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it's, again, you hit the nail right on the head. At the end of the day, it's all about legacy. Roger, how did you feel about the Jaime Jarrin? Also, Juan, you were allowed to be starstruck once a week and once a week only. So
thank you, sir.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, Jaime, Jaime said it, right? I mean, who knows Fernando probably the way, Jaime knows him. Like you said, he was his translator. He was the one that whenever Fernando would speak, it'd be Jaime, translating for him. So he knows, maybe how reserved he is, how he feels just speaking in general to the public, right? So he knows how reserved he is, but he also knows that inside, this is something that he's probably wanted for a long time, right? But he wasn't gonna just come out, like he said, and just like, hey, just let it out. Hey, like make me in Hall of Fame, make me in, retire my number or whatever, put me in the Hall of Fame, right? He's not gonna do that because of the person he is, and Jaime, he was sharing what type of person Fernando is and how he's truly deserving of this honor. Whether he said, for whatever reason, right, it didn't happen sooner, but it's happening now, and we got to appreciate that.
Another guy that you knows him on a different level than we know him, and also may open that can of worms up. Orel Hershiser, the Bulldog, had a chance to swing by and give you some one-on-one times. Let's hear from the Bulldog.
Another legend. So it finally happened. We had a campaign going where we wanted this jersey retired.
Sí,
and
34.
It finally happened.
Yes, it
Your
did.
initial thoughts?
Well, I thought immediately back to AA. That's where Fernando and I became teammates, and I used to drive him to and from the park and find him some food, maybe a six-pack of an adult beverage, and that takes me then to him making it to the Dodgers, and we're still in AA. He's in the All-Star game. He's throwing shutouts. Our manager allows us to have a TV in the dugout to watch during our games, his games, because he was our teammate, and then to see what he accomplished here in Los Angeles and all the fans that he drew around the nation, but especially here in Los Angeles. I mean, he won his arbitration case for $1 million because he was drawing 10,000 to 20,000 more fans per game when he pitched, and Dick Moss, his agent, did an amazing job. Everything he earned, he deserved. And now that this is a new era in Los Angeles Dodger history of you don't have to be a big league Hall of Famer to be a Dodger Hall of Famer. I think it is a great honor, and he's the one that should start this because he has done so much for the Los Angeles community, for everybody, and he will go down in history and now in the Ring of Honor as one of the greatest Dodgers ever.
I mean, you grew up, you played during that era.
Yeah,
you saw
loved it.
I'm talking to the maestro over there, and I said, for the first time, you're going to see two Latinos up there in the Ring of Honor. You're going to see Jarrin and you're going to see Valenzuela.
Yeah.
Does that mean anything to someone who's not a Latino?
Well, when you have a teammate and a friend in Fernando, and you have a mentor and a best friend in Jaime Jarrin, I don't see the differentiations. What I do see is I see people and I see friendship. And I was so fortunate to grow up in sports where in the locker room everyone is the same. Now I understand the distinctions and I understand the importance for cultures and for all different reasons that people need to graduate through and bust through what is perceived as ceilings and places. So yes, it is an honor to know them and to have them as my friends, but I know it's an honor for the culture and for everyone that some Latinos would be up there on the Ring of Honor.
Are you ready for the Retire 55 campaign that's going to come
No,
now?
I don't know. Don't change your focus yet. Let's have a celebration for Fernando.
There we have it.
Move on.
The great Hershiser. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And the Bulldog is right. Definitely, keep the attention on Fernando as much as we can because that's what everyone wants, right? But that is a conversation for another day because the can of worms thing, because he's one of the guys that you should for sure consider retiring his number. Also bilingual, Orel Hershiser coming in hot right there. But I found it interesting that my big thing that I took away from it, and again, this is just from having worked in the game, that their manager in AA let them put a TV in the dugout if you've ever been to a AA anything, I don't even know that they have a cable that long enough that you could plug in. I didn't even know they had power in those dugouts. So that's actually really cool that their manager back in the day let them watch, Fernando starts in the dugout.
You know what's crazy about that too, Alonso, is I lose sight. When Hershiser brought it up, I totally forgot they came up together. Like they pitched together in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
And it makes me sit there and wonder, like, hey, could this be Bobby Miller, Gavin Stone, all these new kids that are coming up? Like they started together in the minor leagues, and it was nice to see that they rooted for one another. So the fact, and he mentioned it, like when Hershiser said, it was like for the person to break this tradition, you had to start with Valenzuela.
Yeah.
If you're going to break it, Valenzuela is the one to do it. So now that they did it, look, I hear, like I mentioned, I hear Garvey. The other name that I hear, probably not as much as Garvey, but the other name I hear when talking about retiring numbers is Hershiser. So It'll be interesting to see what the Dodgers do down the road. But the fact that Hershiser acknowledged, and then the other thing that I liked that Hershiser had said, there's many times when we're talking to these guys, especially like, for example, Julio Urias, who does his English maybe not as strong. Yeah. At FanFest, Miguel Vargas used a translator. He is not comfortable with his English. When you have guys in the locker room that you can't communicate with in your native language, and you have to find other ways to speak with them, you would think that, well, there's going to be some distance then, because how can you really be close to someone that you can't communicate with? For Hershiser to say there that, in the end, what he sees are his friends and his colleagues, that to me is just like language it's just a tool. It is not a barrier. And like there's a reason why Jackie Robinson in baseball was the sport that broke the color barrier and all that stuff. And that is because when you're in a locker room together, when you are a team, you embrace your differences, and we're in it together.
Absolutely. Some of my favorite interactions in clubhouses is watching Latino guys talk to the English speakers, because those guys, because the Latinos all vociferous and talking with their hands, and then the English speakers just like what? But they're in the clubhouse. There is no language. You figure out a way to do it, right? And that's case in point. Roger, what was your takeaway from the Bulldog?
My takeaway is we need to get Bulldog back on to tell us some more of those stories, those traveling stories back in AA with Fernando. So we got to hear some of those stories. I think that'd be interesting to hear.
I wanted to another guy whose number you could debate that probably might have to retire when it's all said and done for him is Dave Roberts, and I know that might piss some people off, but at the end of the day, like this run that this guy's on, it's something, right? So it's, obviously he's still got a lot in the tank and still got some time on that contract, so you never know how it pans out. But that guy might ruffle some feathers with wanting that to be retired. I liked his perspective from Doc Rogers because Doc Roberts, has a different perspective because former player, now manager, and kind of like that Orel Hershiser perspective. So let's go ahead and hear from the skip himself, Dave Roberts.
Reaction to just the Fernando news that they're going to retire his number.
I just found this out. I think it's great. You're talking about changing, enhancing an organization to another country, Mexico, that fan base. He was such an impactful person and player with the Dodgers. And so to now get his numbered retired. And so from here on out, and even before today's retirement of the number, when you thought of the Dodgers in 34, you thought of Fernando. So now it's just more finalized. And I think it couldn't have been more fitting that we did it today at FanFest with a beautiful day. And I just had an opportunity to speak to Fernando, and he was very grateful, but very apropos. Fantastic.
Again, I mean, you couldn't have said it any better, especially for the active manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Juan, what was your takeaway?
We're going to talk about this in another episode, but for me, it is so funny that once Fernando left the Dodgers, it seemed like no one else was going to be able to wear number 34 because of what Dave Roberts says. When you think of the Dodgers and you think that number 34, you think of Valenzuela. There are certain organizations in sports that when you think of a number, you think of a specific player. And I think that's more than enough reason to go ahead and retire that person's number, right? I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer, right? But can you think of, when you're thinking of the Chicago Bulls, there's no way you don't think of anybody else that wears 23, right? The 23 is Jordan. All those people before who wore 23 on the Bulls, they might as well not exist, right? Because 23 is always going to be Michael Jordan. Again, we're going to get to this in another episode, but it would have been really hard. Can you imagine being the dude who wore 34 on the Dodgers after Valenzuela left? I wouldn't want to deal with that, right, Babyface?
Yeah, I mean, can you even think of anybody who wore 34 like before Fernando? I mean, no one wore it after, but do you recall anybody ever wearing that number prior to Fernando?
No, and it's a good point because look, for the number 10, you can say Ron Say, and you have Justin Turner, right? For 14, Gil Hodges. There's two other people that wore number 14 that I could tell, Kike and Mike Scioscia. So, I mean, I think you're at 55, Hershiser, Russell Martin, but you can't do that with 34.
And I looked it up, and someone that wore 34 before Fernando, he was a pretty good player during his time. Lee Lacy. Remember Lee Lacy? He wore 34. And then also the brother to a famous Hall of Famer, Ken Brett, wore it for one season before Fernando got it.
Look at that. In the words of the great Ross Porter, would you like to try some Dodger trivia?
Well, and the other perspective that we like to hear and we get to hear from, fortunately, is current guys, guys that are there now, because they're obviously, again, the old perspective and the new perspective. And one guy that I was super curious to hear from and to kind of hear his reaction was the current young Mexican ace, Julio Urias, who in my opinion, he's been getting so much better with media. He's been getting so much better with the media rounds because he understands kind of the position that he's in, right? He's the ace, he's the guy. Should have won the NL Cy Young, but I digress. But hearing his perspective as a young guy, and also because he's close to Fernando. So let's hear from the guy himself, Julio Urias, from the kid.
Dijeron ahorita cuando llegué y la verdad que sí me sentí, incluso estaba por un lado de él y la verdad que sí es algo muy bonito porque como lo digo, no me tocó su época, pero me va a tocar en su época cuando le retiren su número, que obviamente se lo merece y es algo que va a ser muy bonito, como lo digo, y el estar presentes ese día para mí va a ser algo que inolvidable.
Yeah, I found out when I got here. I was actually sitting right next to him when I found out. So I did, like I said, I didn't grow up in his era. I didn't spend time in that era. But to be a part of it now that I'm pitching and then for them to retire the number, it's going to be a really special moment.
Again, you recognize that it's a different era than it was. It's kind of wild to think that it's been 40 years since all that has happened, right? So I'm not even 40. So it's kind of wild to think
you're not a man yet.
Wow. That it's been that long. It's been a generation, more or less, right? So to hear that from the youngster is kind of cool. But also, again, just a very well composed answer, because I know Julio has a very kind of deep relationship with that guy because there's a lot of similarities, right?
Yeah, look, two things that I took away from there. And one, you said this before, Alonso, off the air. Julio has entered the rockero stage.
Yes.
And the amount of shit that he got for his hair, especially from friend of the carne asada, Dylan Hernandez, was pretty impressive. But think about it this way. Hershiser said that Valenzuela won his arbitration case based because he brought 10 to 20,000 fans to the stadium.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some players that you can factor that in, but how many players, when you go to arbitration, are you factoring the decision of he's a draw. This is how much he'll bring. He's not only a bonus to us on the field, but off the field. The fact that Julio, and this also I think speaks to legacy, the minute Julio made the Dodgers and he was pitching in the major leagues, I know, especially the older heads, couldn't help but think, this is Valenzuela. This is Valenzuela part 2. And I feel it was kind of the way old Mexican boxing fans are so desperate to get another Julio Cesar Chavez, so desperate to get a great Mexican fighter that any Mexican fighter that comes on, they automatically try to champion him and make him and be one of their past heroes. And I think that's a lot of pressure because I'm sure this is not the first time Julio has been asked about Valenzuela. I'm sure when Julio was coming up, he's left-handed. He was pudgy like Valenzuela when he first came up. He's from Mexico. The pressure that Julio must have dealt with, you need to be Valenzuela. You need to be the next great Mexican hero here for the Dodgers. And it's the torch, right? And that's why, to me, it's important, again, that we know the story of Valenzuela. And I hope that Julio wins, not necessarily his arbitration, but I hope he wins his free agency and he stays with the Dodgers, and that the Dodgers recognize how important Julio is to this franchise. I'm not saying, so pump the brakes, I'm not saying Julio is Valenzuela. I just find it interesting that that's probably something, the comparisons Julio had to deal with so far up until this point in his career.
And I think it's fair to say that Fernando and Julio also have different stylists as far as that goes too, because Julio clearly has been listening to El Tri, but I digress. Roger, what say you about Julio?
And like you said, when Julio came up, right, that's what people thought of Fernando, right? But look how long it took, right? Almost 40 years, 35, 36 years between a Mexican superstar pitcher, right? So this is something that we know. It's not, okay, yeah, we're going to get another guy in, 2-3 years. This is something once in a generation, right? My dad is the one that saw Fernando, right? I saw Fernando as a young kid, but I've gotten to see Julio, right, as in my adulthood. So it's special to get these guys to come up, right? And like I said, we're not saying Julio is Fernando, right? But they're doing their own thing, right? They're setting their own path, and it's special to see guys like Julio in the MLB, right, and being a top pitcher.
I always think of it this way. I know they're different sports, but it's a comparison because it's a legacy thing. Bronny, LeBron James' son, obviously has to play in the shadow of his dad, who is still playing at an elite level, right? Like he's I think 2 years older than me, something like that. No chance I could be playing anywhere to where he's at. I'm curling tacos. This is what I'm doing. But Bronny has to play in that shadow, and he's made his own legacy, right? He's made his own kind of path to the whatever the next level is for him, right? And I think Julio, granted, there's separation and different in the sense of, not his dad, but the parallels were there. And some people, either kind of fold under that pressure, or some people are able to kind of be driven on that pressure. And I think Julio, to a certain degree, has been driven because he's his own guy. He's went out and created his own legacy, and here we are. He's one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. So it's again, the parallels are there, but this is where we're at. Unfair as society goes, but it is what it is. Another guy that we heard from, I think he may or may not have dethroned Joe Beimel as the ambassador of this podcast. It's hard to say, but no disrespect to Beimel. But he also, he can come to a carne asada too, because he's Mexican. Joe Kelly stopped by and gave us his insight. Let's hear from Mr. Kelly.
He finally got retired. They announced that they're going to retire it this year. What do you think?
That is sick. I know Julio too, especially. He was always a big fan, and I think honestly, the retirement number thing is great. It sucks because what if a guy wants his number? I'm just joking, Fernando. But it's about time. It's about time. He's had unbelievable numbers. And Dodgers are the best organization, and they're doing a good job. And they were just taking their time, I think they were just taking their time. But it's going to be a big celebration. I hope they have, obviously a big party for him, and he deserves it.
The music was fitting, by the way. That was my biggest takeaway. Is the music was perfect. No, that's a show guy, right? He's in the show. He's in a different organization. He comes from. We've talked about it before, having had him on previously. Comes from another blue blood organization in the Cardinals and the Red Sox, so he understands what traditions mean, and for him to be as excited as well, and that's genuine. He was genuinely excited for Fernando, because also he said it on this show too. He subscribes to the history of the game, so he knows what that means. Aside from the music and the slow dancing that was occurring there, Juan, what was your takeaway about the ambassador?
It's funny because Jerry Hairston told us this, but Joe took the other. And I know Joe was kidding about this, but there are people. I know when I was growing up playing baseball and I got to choose my number, I wanted 34. And I was like, give me 34. Even though I wasn't a pitcher, I wanted to wear 34 because of Valenzuela. So I am curious as to how many major leaguers who played for the Dodgers wanted to wear 34 to honor Valenzuela. But then, Jerry Hairston had told us one time, and that was just like, I don't want that number. That's Fernando's number, because out of respect, you don't want to deem like, hey, you have no business wearing this number. How many people were already hating on Syndergaard when they were reporting him on the online that he was going to be wearing number 34? It's like, he can't wear 34. So it's growing up in California, I think you also are aware of Valenzuela's legacy, but I think it was great that Joe Kelly acknowledged it.
Speaking of being upset that he was going to wear 34, a guy who threw that in our group text, Babyface Gimmick and Sky Roger. What was your takeaway from Joe Kelly there?
Yeah, we've said this before. Like Joe is the real one, right? He says what he wants to say, right? He's not going to sugarcoat anything, and he's even saying, and I've heard this before too. Like, Joe loves the Dodgers. He really loves this Dodgers organization, even though he's not on the Dodgers anymore. He still speaks really highly of them. I've heard him say, Dodgers are the best fans. He just said it there. Dodgers are the best organization. So Joe keeps it real, and he's a real, true Angelino.
Hey, we're up against it on the clock.
Yeah.
How many more of these do we have? Maybe we should just all play them and then react to them after. Yeah.
So we got JD, J Hair, Carols, and Muncy. So let's start with Muncy from FanFest.
Okay.
your Charros days on the retire Valenzuela number. It finally got retired today. What are your thoughts?
It's exciting. You know, it's he's what I was saying. One of the first things you learn about when you come to this organization, obviously everyone knows Jackie and the barrier that he broke, and the impact that he's had on this game. But one of the first people you learn about is Fernando. Just the impact he's had in the organization, in the city, the fan base around the world, not just the country, around the world. And it's that's something that speaking of my Charlos days, when I went down there, they talk about Fernando, and at that time I wasn't even with the Dodgers, and so it's just that's one of the first guys you learn about when you come into this organization. So to see his number finally get retired, it's really special. It's very exciting. I'm very happy for him, and I can't wait to see number 34 up on the wall.
And Jerry Hairston.
Here with the great Jerry Hairston. Jerry, during Fan Fest, they made the big announcement. Finally, it happened. And since we know he's a Blaxican, we know how important this is. By the way, I read when we talked to Andre Jackson, I said Jerry Hairston said it was okay to call you Blaxican, and he just laughed about it.
We're proud people.
But your mother's Mexican.
Sí, from Sonora.
And we talked about this when you were on the show. Did you get a chance to really factor in how this is going to impact all those fans that come into Dodger Stadium and they're going to see that 34 finally up there?
We as players, and I know the Dodger fans have been clamoring for the Dodgers to retire Fernando Valenzuela, because we all know nobody was going to wear number 34 out of respect and out of what he did for not just Dodger baseball, not just Dodger fans, but a whole plethora of Mexican fans around the world. So I'm glad that the Dodgers are retiring Fernando Valenzuela's jersey. Listen, it's been a long time coming. I'm glad they're doing it, and congrats, Fernando.
So now when Dodger fans walk into that Ring of Honor, walk into the stadium, up in the Ring of Honor, they're going to see not only Valenzuela, but they're going to see Jarrin's name on there. This is L.A. There's a lot of Latino fans in there. Are we underplaying the significance of that?
We're not, because, again, it's not just L.A. fans. Mexico. You go down to Mexico, the country, most of them are, Dodger fans. They pull for Fernando Valenzuela. They know who Jaime Jarrin is, the impact he'd had on the Latin community. So I'm glad that they're having that Ring of Honor, and you're going to have Jaime up there, and now you're going to have Fernando Valenzuela.
Last one, can you, I guess for us fans who are old enough, when we look at Julio Urias, we can't help but think of Valenzuela. That's legacy right there, right?
It is legacy. And again, Julio is making his own mark, and he has made his own mark so far. Obviously, closing out the World Series in 2020, recording that last out as that save. But he's continued to grow, continue to get better, and he's just now entering his prime. He means a lot to this Dodger organization and to Latino fans everywhere. And I'm excited to see him not just pitch this year, but several years for the Dodgers.
Eric Karros.
We are with friend of the carne asada, Eric Karros. Eric, you're here supporting Justin Turner, but what's important to us, what matters, is that Fernando Valenzuela's jersey got retired this weekend. What are your thoughts?
Definitely deserved and long overdue. And I think, for me it's special because guess who I'm playing with today in my group?
Valenzuela.
My man. Yes, Fernando. So it's great. But again, what he, it's not just about what he did on the field, but it's how he impacted the community, the city. He really brought a whole new group of fans and introduced them to Dodger baseball. And really, I'd say that, Mexican Americans are the backbone of the Dodgers. And if it weren't for Fernando, I don't know that it ever would have gone down that road. And, what Fernando has meant, and like I said, the way he's carried himself, what he's done for the organization, it goes well beyond his accomplishments on the field.
So, am I understating this? When Dodger fans go in there now and they look up in the Ring of Honor, not only are they going to see Valenzuela, but they see Jarrin's name up there.
Well, Jaime, look at Jaime paved the way, right? And he is the voice. It's, there's Vin Scully, there's Jaime Jarrin when you talk about Dodger baseball and really the conduit of the Dodgers and the fans. And sure, initially they both hit different audiences, but I think, over time, both those Hall of Famers were just Dodger voices.
For us older Dodger fans, when we see Urias, we can't help but think of Valenzuela.
Right.
That legacy is important, right, in sports?
Well, look, for a fan, you always get attached to, your team and then specific players that come up, maybe when you are a kid or maybe a certain part of your life. And look at Urias, what he does is he brings those of us that grew up with Valenzuela or played with Fernando. Wow, this is a guy that mimics what Fernando did. And then it kind of, it ties everything together. Look at Julio's a great pitcher, one of the top in the game. And, look, he's done wonderful things for the Dodgers, and I hope that he's a Dodger for a long time.
We're going to let him go because he's got to go golf, but I just want to say, he called that the Dodgers were going to be a very different team. Go back, listen to the episode, the smartest man in baseball, right?
I don't know about the smartest man, but the luckiest today because I'm golfing with Fernando.
Thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate it.
And JD.
Fernando Valenzuela's jersey just got announced that it's going to be retired. Are you aware, have you been indoctrinated into the Fernando Valenzuela legacy?
I'm aware of it. He was an unbelievable pitcher, especially for the Spanish community. And I know this is his home. This is the Dodgers. Obviously I haven't been in this organization long to know how deep they go, but I know from an outsider coming in, he's one of the faces of the Dodgers.
Well, be ready because that first home game at Dodger Stadium, you're going to feel all the Latinos at Dodger Stadium.
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Big thanks to JD Martinez, Jerry Hairston Jr., Eric Karros, and Max Muncy for stopping by. All friends of the Carne Asada. By the way, Eric Karros, serious golf guy with the protein drink and banana in hand, ready to go. That's how you know you're serious.
Alonzo, and he wanted his point, man. He wanted his point. That was the first thing he said to me. He was like, "Give me my point."
And you know what? He's not wrong. I mean, he wasn't wrong and isn't wrong. I think I have to say, because again, these guys have all been in the organization, so they understand it. And Jerry Hairston, another guy that subscribes to the history of baseball as well. Can't stress it enough. The importance that Fernando means to this organization. Every single one of those guys validated that. Be a legend like Eric Karros, be a World Series MVP champion, whatever else he lists on his plaque, Jerry Hairston Jr., and JD Martinez, who just showed up. Even, obviously he's not been fully, as you said, Juan, indoctrinated, but he's starting to realize the importance that figure is for the Dodgers. I like the way I would have phrased it is like, hey, Dustin Pedroia is a big deal for Boston, just like Fernando is, but that would also be disrespectful to either or because they're on different platforms. But regardless, I'm happy, and this might be the only time that we gloat a little bit, but I feel like a good chunk of this couldn't have been possible. I'm not going to say it happened because of this, but it added the momentum to it, as to our listeners and subscribers that also helped us raise a little hell. So big thanks to those folks. I don't do well with credit, Juan, as you know, so I will let you carry it on from here.
Yes, I'm going to help you with that credit. Before I go over to that credit, though, I do just want to acknowledge a couple of things in those interviews that we saw. Muncy had said that, when he came to the Dodgers, he already knew about Valenzuela because of his time in the Mexican League with the Charros. But Muncy said it. When you come to the Dodgers, you get told the story of Fernando Valenzuela. And you probably need to, because you're probably going to look out in the stands and see everybody wearing that number 34 jersey, and you're going to be like, hey, who's Valenzuela? Why do they keep wearing that guy's jersey? I thought it was very interesting that he had mentioned Jackie Robinson first and then Valenzuela, and I know those two are not on the same level, so I'm not saying that. But what I think is interesting is that in terms of importance to the Dodgers organization, Valenzuela is up there in terms of Jackie Robinson, in terms of impact on this organization. So I thought it was great that friend of the Carne Asada, Max Muncy, said that. Jerry Hairston speaks for himself. The other thing is Eric Karros said it, man, a white dude, that Mexican Americans are the heart of the Dodgers fan base. And that's because of Valenzuela. And we've said it, we've said it on this show many times. Look at the stands. Look at everybody. Everybody seems to acknowledge it. So I appreciate friend of the Carne Asada, Eric Karros, and you have your point, sir. You have your point. And then finally, the JD Martinez thing. this is the reason why, for me, it's important to bring it up, because it is obvious from his answer that I feel. And look, JD Martinez probably wasn't even old enough to see Valenzuela pitch, right?
He's
But
also from Miami. Let's give him
Yeah.
diligence too.
So that's why it's important that not only the number be retired, because when people see that number up there who don't know anything about Valenzuela, they're going to ask who number 34 is. I know, like when I bring friends to Dodger games and they aren't Dodger fans and they look at the retired numbers, they try to figure out which player is like, who's this, who wore the, and then you get to explain to them why they're important to the Dodgers organization, who they are. And that's why it's important, because Valenzuela is part of the Dodgers history. So now you get to explain to someone, well, this is what this guy did. He came up and he showed up. So that brings me to the credit. I want to thank all our fans and listeners, because the minute this was announced, the number of messages that we got on social media, that we got on YouTube, saying, you guys did it. Look, there's a lot of people in the media that are taking credit for this. All of a sudden, there was a lot of people on local sports radio in LA that said they have been talking about this for years. Now, I don't listen to every show. That may be true. There may be people on ESPN 710 that have been talking about this for years. But all I can say is we have been talking for this for years, and our listeners have confirmed that, because I want to thank all our listeners for sending all those messages. To me, my favorite one was my compadre while I was at FanFest. The minute it went viral, I'll never forget this image. They make the announcement and all the reporters are on their phones tweeting out the news that Valenzuela's jersey's retired. So once it went viral and everybody was finding out, my compadre sent me a 2-word text and it said, "You won." And it's because they know that our whole goal was to go ahead and get this jersey retired, and it finally happened. So I want to segue here to give credit to the man who really deserves this. This number was retired because of Babyface. Babyface is 2 for 2 on his causes. This is a man who took down Frank McCourt, and now he is the man who is known as for getting Fernando Valenzuela's jerseys retired. So take a lap, Babyface. Speech.
And what I was telling you guys, like, I don't think, yeah, of course we feel good that it's retired, right? And we feel that our little show did help to get the awareness out there, right? I mean, if you go back and look at how many shows we've done, with what, 31, how many shows do you think we talked about Fernando's number being retired?
Probably 131.
Probably, yeah. I mean, at least like 100 of them, right? I mean, so it's something that we just kept pounding and pounding and pounding and putting it out there, right? And like I said earlier, I think the noise gets louder, right, with stuff like this, and I think that is what eventually made the Dodgers organization decide, you know what, let's retire this number, because it's only going to continue getting louder, right? And we knew this year that was one of our goals. Is like, we got to make this even louder, right? If they don't retire this number, we had planned. We were going to make it louder this year to make it more of a campaign to get it done. And, thankfully, don't have to go that route, right? And, it's done. But like I said, we'll take our little whatever 2% credit for it or whatever it was, right? But like I said, I think they just realized that as time goes on, it was just going to get louder and louder. And obviously, it's a great decision, and we're happy that it happened, and we're glad that it's gonna come August, what is it, 22nd or something like that, we'll see that number up, hanging up at Dodger Stadium.
These guys know I don't fare well with credit garbage, and I refuse to take any credit for this. But I will say to the people that reached out, I got a lot of texts that day. I haven't been around because I've been working. So that might be why you haven't seen me do a lot of these things, but at the end of the day, like Juan said, the initiative started with Babyface. He's the one that wanted to raise hell, and also we cannot forget that our colleague, who also has been busy with work, Alicia del Valle, la princesa de Picolandia, also took she wanted to take some people down. She was there was she was like whatever we got to do, let's go ahead and do it. I mean, she stopped short of like hit pieces, you know what I mean? But she, she made a point, to emphasize that. So we also can't forget her in all of this, because she made it, she's made noise, she's made it known, she's raised hell that at the end of the day, this was the right thing to do. It should have been done a long time ago. As friend of the show and personal friend in real life, Dale Murphy pointed out, I had no idea that this number wasn't retired. There's so many people that thought it was retired, and granted, I mean, it's a very small group of guys that have had their numbers retired by the Dodgers. And I don't see another guy that's fitting of it, at least at the moment, to start breaking that rule with, that isn't Fernando Valenzuela. But also to you guys, the fans, whether you supported our cause, whether you didn't, but you recognized that the number had to be retired for raising hell. Because now, come August 11th through the 13th, when they host the Rockies at the Ravine, Fernando's going to get not only just the jersey retirement, but a whole weekend. And for me, that's fitting. I just hope that they get the Tigers of the North to play the entrance music for him as he comes out of the center field wall. But that's a fight for another day. But I mean, I cannot emphasize it enough, and I can't say it enough. I'm so happy for Fernando Valenzuela, for his family, for the the legacy, because again, you have to remember the number is going to be retired forever. So that's it. It's a wrap. And so for me, that can't mean anymore as a Mexican from Los Angeles, that that's what right? That's kind of what's embedded in your blood is Dodger blue, that and the Lakers stuff, and then whatever the fandom contract is for football. But I digress. I cannot say without any other exclamation point how happy we are for Fernando Valenzuela and his family. So got to tip the cap to you, my guy. The sombrero can be thrown in the air because it's just going to hang out there forever now. So respect to you, sir. We're going to go ahead and wrap this guy up. This episode was presented by our partners at Bet Online. If you head on over to betonline.ag and use our promo code, which is BLEAV, BLAV, you will receive a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. To everyone that joined us, all those guys, Max Muncy, JD Martinez, Eric Caros, who got his point today. Good for you, sir. Dave Roberts, the man himself, Fernando Valenzuela, Jaime Jarrin. I'm forgetting someone, but be that as it may, to everyone. Julio Urias. Our apologies to Julio Urias for the bump there. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for stopping by and for being friends of the Carne Asada. We are the Bleed Los Podcast. It's your boys Alonso Juan, Babyface Gimmick in the Sky Roger, Alicia del Valle also around somewhere. But we appreciate you guys. We appreciate the support, and we'll catch you down the road.